In my time as a counselor, I've heard a lot of people talk about what it was like for them growing up. And in fact, I've read a lot of people's life stories from all different kinds of backgrounds. And there's one kind of response that I find myself having consistently more than any other. And it goes something like, thank God you survived. It's amazing, given the circumstances of your life, that you made it this far. And I'm grateful that you made it so that we can be here with each other. Now, given that response, you might be thinking that I'm talking about people who grew up in particularly abusive families, or where they faced conditions of extreme poverty or addiction or violence growing up. And while I know plenty of people who have those kinds of backgrounds, I'm not just talking about them. I'm talking about people who have had other really challenging experiences too, like going to middle school. I mean, you know what middle school is like? That place can be really challenging. You've got social aggression and bullying and all these ways that you're learning you're supposed to be that you don't really want to be, and people grading you on things that don't matter to you, and it happens every day over and over. It really takes its toll on people. It's like we can notice that there are certain things that justify how challenging it is for us to have it be hard for us being a person, like abuse. But other things, just the kind of normal, mundane, everyday background stuff, doesn't seem to us like justification for it being hard. But as it turns out, it's hard for everyone. It's hard being a person. Everyone suffers and struggles and grapples with the same kinds of things. I mean, think about it. Even from the very beginning, you're born into the world and you're an infant. And when you're an infant and you're hungry, it's like the world is ending. I mean, you're just screaming in pain and you have no idea what's going on or what to do about it. It's just this intense, chaotic experience. And that's how we start. And in some ways, it never goes away because we have these feelings that can just be overwhelming and these incessant needs. And we have minds that just won't leave us alone. And so we're contending with these things all the time, even in the best of conditions. But we weren't born into the best of conditions. We were born into societies that unfortunately were not the most hospitable places for us. Somehow the adults who were here before we even got here failed to do a very good job making the communities that we grew up in the right kinds of communities for human beings to thrive in. And so we all have these similar kinds of challenges that we face. And so let me give you an example. If you think about somebody who grew up poor, and maybe speaks to your experience, you can think about what it's like to not know whether your needs are going to get met, and to be scared about that all the time, to have the tension and stress that goes on in your home that comes from not knowing whether you'll be able to pay for heating. And that is something people are familiar with and think is a reason to struggle as a person. But I've heard people who grew up middle class in the suburbs, in nuclear families, talk about things that are really difficult for them, like when they learn that all of life is just a show, that pretense and having a nicely manicured lawn is what matters, instead of saying anything real about what your real experience is like, or what it's like to be sheltered, and as a result not know how to endure challenges which you're ultimately going to face later in life. Or people who have grown up rich and who talk about being really cut off from almost everybody else, or being raised by people who weren't their parents, or not knowing whether their friends really wanted to be friends with them for them or just because they had money. I'm not saying that these things are all equivalent to each other, but I'm saying that no matter what kind of class background you come from, you can have real challenges that as a human being you have to contend with from early on, and that you may not figure out even later in life what to really do about. It's like I meet people who are struggling with something. Like someone might be bulimic, or maybe not even bulimic. They just might find themselves having lots of feelings that they want to stuff with food all the time, and so they eat more than they need. And they think, why am I like this? It must be that something really bad happened in my childhood. It must be that I have some hidden history of abuse that is yet to be uncovered. I don't even know about it. And so people are looking for an explanation. People are seeking to find out, why is it hard for me to be a person right now? And yet, it may not have anything to do with that. It may be that there's a bunch of mundane stuff that is kind of like the basic challenges everybody faces that are actually hard enough that no further explanation is required. And if you did have a history of visible, non-hidden abuse that you're perfectly aware of, you may think that's the reason why things are hard for you now. But there are other reasons why things are hard for you too, that have to do with all this kind of normal stuff that we take for granted, that we think is just the way it is. So when you're doing a counseling session, you don't want to just counsel on your abuse or whatever the thing was that's in the foreground that was particularly hard in your childhood, if you had anything like that. You also want to focus on all these other things that we take for granted, like what it was like to grow up maybe feeling like you didn't belong anywhere, or like you had to give up on your real self or your real values in order to belong, or what it was like to grow up in a world where people seemed to compete with each other instead of cooperate to get their needs met, or how hard it was seeing people be mean to each other, or to see the adults around you seeming to be living partial lives, sort of deadened because they don't really like their jobs or what they do. There are all kinds of things that can give us this sense of confusion about how to be a person, and nobody ever explains them to us. No one ever tells us how to do it. And then you grow up and you get thrust out into the world and you're told, okay, now figure out a way to make some money and survive. Or you're handed this newborn baby and you're told, okay, now figure out how to be a parent. And it's really confusing. It's challenging, just being a person. And so this is important. I don't mean to say that life isn't awesome. Life is really awesome. And it's also wonderful being a person. But it's hard being a person too. We all have our challenges. And so there's a couple of goals here when you realize this. And one is not to have a horribleness competition with anybody else. It doesn't matter that you didn't experience the bad thing that somebody else did. You experienced the challenges that you had, and they're real. Your suffering is just as valid as anybody else's. And so it's important to have compassion for yourself and what it was like for you, just as you learn to have compassion for others and what it was like for them in ways that are different than what it was like for you. The challenges that we face are often guides to how to make our lives better and better and how to make the world better and better. It's like your anxiety or your depression or your outrage about injustice or your unease about something that you don't even know what it is. Those things, those disturbances, they drive us to figure out how to make our lives better and how to make the lives of the people around us better. They're the things that drive us to make a better world. It may be the case that in any era, in any part of the world, it'll always be hard being a human being for just anybody. But we can notice what was hard for us and make use of that to try to be the adults who, when new humans get born into the world, have made it a better and more hospitable place for them to be part of. It's hard enough being a person, and we can figure out ways to make the things that shouldn't have to be so hard better and better for ourselves and for the people around us.